Laurie Huston's News for the Heart is dedicated to helping you give a voice to your own soul. Our hearts have the power to free us from pain and the struggles that keep us from awakening to our true essence. Join Laurie now as we delve into our heart and soul to find the path that will open us to the possibilities and lead us to the life we love to live.
And good afternoon. This is News for the Heart. It is the last Tuesday of the month, so I have my awesome co-host, Tom Campbell, with me. Welcome, Tom. I was just about to go into it.
Thank you, Laurie. It's my pleasure to be here. I always enjoy these sessions we have on the last Tuesday of the month.
Me too.
They are a lot of fun, and they kind of get down to the basics of what really matters in people's individual day-to-day lives, and
right.
That's an important part of it. You know, if you have a theory of everything, people want to talk about science. They want to talk about philosophy. They want to talk about, you know, where are things going? And there's lots of other subjects you can talk about when the subject is everything. Yeah. But you bring the focus down to, all right, so what does this mean to us? You know, what does this mean to our everyday lives, our decisions, our choices, who we are, and how we grow, how we become more? Where do we find happiness?
Right.
And that's a real critical thing to talk about. So I'm really pleased to be here and kind of be grounded now by you and into the subjects that matter the most to individual people.
Right. Or just me. All right. Well, so this past month, I'm going to bring up an example, and I want to talk about judgment and maybe discernment and maybe why we go to that place. But so the example, of course, is what happened with the Dalai Lama, caught on video. Apparently, there was maybe a discrepancy in wording, how they translated his words. What I do know is that something about blow in my face is different than suck on my tongue. But that child, if you watch the video, was not upset in any way. In fact, he was exuberant. And the thing is, I think we, in the Western world, we're so focused on our children and how there's a lot of terrible things that have happened, especially in history. But in this case, it was really much more of a blessing and something kind of beautiful. It's just that because the Western world has this judgment or I guess understandable hesitation around what should be offered with children and what shouldn't be. But in this case, I mean, that boy probably will never see the media, so he'll never be affected by all of the stuff that was put out there. But it certainly created a lot of anger in a lot of people in both cases, because the Tibetans are, well, yes, he apologized, but really didn't have anything to apologize for, because this was a blessing. And it's not just a blessing for the child, but it's a blessing for the entire family. And then, you know, the Western world kind of got up in arms because it was like, oh, child abuse, and how could he? And it just went in a different direction. And of course, he apologized, not necessarily because he did anything wrong, but because the perception was that he did something wrong, and he didn't want that as the perception. But the thing is how do we, like, that judgment that we're so quick to judge and send this all out and get really angry and really feel justified in the anger that we feel, instead of, yes, in some cases, child abuse has been horrific and terrible, and the sexual aspect of it is just unbelievable. And I would never, ever, ever say that's okay, ever. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a small situation that just got blown up, mainly because he's a very powerful figurehead, especially in a spiritual, religious way. But okay, so judgment, we just feel justified in judging everybody and everything without taking any discernment or don't know, looking at a situation from every angle instead of looking at it from a very limited perspective. So I thought we would talk about that and see where it goes. I'm sure it'll be a very interesting talk. And like I said, I'm not saying that child abuse or sexual abuse on children is anything that we would agree on ever. And then, of course, there's the people that say, but that's terrible and we should fight for it. And then we get back to the fighting. It's like, well, are we helping the situation? Are we making it worse? Or can we just offer love to those children or to everything? Okay, so I've said enough.
Okay. And for those listeners out there that don't have a clue of what Laurie was talking about, you know, who did not, who are not people who stay up with the news, you know, and I'm one of those that don't stay up with the news, but I did happen to hear about this event, so I do know what you're talking about. The Dalai Lama was interacting with actually a family, and it was a very young child, and he's a very sweet guy, of course. He's a guy that's full of love and caring and so on, and he was interacting with this child, and as one does interact with childs, you know, when you're with a little child, you do baby talk, you do silly things because that's what the child relates to, and so on. So he was talking with this child, and no doubt he was also having fun, because when you're grown up like he is, then a child is a beautiful thing. So he and this little child and the child's family were all kind of there, and he said something that was interpreted by someone, I don't know who, but somebody interpreted it as "suck on my tongue," you know, which of course is kind of a goofy thing to say to a child, "suck on my tongue." I guess if you had a very, goofy sense of humor, you might think that was funny, you know, and the child might think that was funny, and maybe you'd say that to a child just to make the child giggle, or think that it was ridiculous, you know, the ridiculous being funny. But it seemed out of place, and it to Western ears, that was kind of inappropriate thing to say to a child. All right. Now, the Tibetans, of course, who understood the language, said, no, it doesn't. That's not it at all. That's not what he said. That's, but in any case, that's what got sent out in the media and then spread like a wildfire all through the media. The Dalai Lama told a little child to suck on his tongue, oh no. And it was a big deal. So that's kind of what happened. It's as you say, it's making a mountain out of a molehill. The better interpretation was blow in my face, not suck on my tongue, but blow, suck, kind of whatever you can see in a language and face. I don't know, but anyway, I don't know that language, and I have no comment on it other than let's just talk about judgment and how quick we are to judge others. And that is a characteristic, probably the seminal characteristic of self-centeredness. Mm. When you are self-centered, you tend to judge everyone. And you judge them based on yourself. You are the yardstick, you're the measurement. You're the thing that others get compared to. You compare others to yourself. So we judge people. Here we are, self-centered, sitting at the center of our own universe, and we interact with other people, and we judge them. Yeah. Are they better than us? Are they not as good as us? And we love to find people who are not as good as us because it makes us feel better about ourselves. Oh, look at those people. They're not as good as us. Us. Me. Really, they're not as good as me, and that makes me feel better because now I'm superior to those people who aren't as good as me. So partly it's a strategy we use to make ourselves feel better. It's, most people don't feel real great most of the time. Most people are probably in what would be, what in medical circles be called a kind of a light or a pre depression.
Okay.
I don't know, there's a word for that. Not really clinically depressed yet, but, sort of depressed, heading in that direction. I can't remember. There is a medical term for it, but it's not
right.
Peri-depression or pre-depression. It's got its own little medical term for that. But most of us in the world are like that. We're not real happy in our lives. Our lives are struggles. Our lives are difficult. Our lives are a problem because things just don't go the way they should. Things just aren't the way they should be. And we know, of course, how things should be. We have our opinions about how things should be, and we don't really see those as our opinions. We see those as facts. Okay? That's something we believe. And people do not see their beliefs as beliefs. They see their beliefs as facts. That's what the word believe means. I believe it. They think that is a fact. So most people look out and see the world, and it is not the way they'd like to have it. Their children aren't doing what they should be doing, which is being polite and courteous and get along well with each other and don't fight and do their homework and, et cetera, et cetera. That's the way the kids should be. And they're not like that. So that's a problem. Spouse is not the way the spouse should be. The spouse is, doesn't help as much, doesn't do this as much, isn't that as much as they should be. And they're too much of this other thing that they shouldn't be. And that's not really so great either. And the job, well, we all know the job, the job just something we have to do to get paid, but we really don't like going there, and it's not much fun. And most of the people that work there are just not all that nice. They're competitive. They're trying to get ahead of you. It's the kind of the jungle out there at the job, or you get treated as not very important on your job, or your job's boring. We can go on and on about the job, but most people do not get up and say, "Oh, I get to go to work today. How great. I love going to work." Very, very few people feel that way, about anything, about their children, about their spouses, about their job, about anything, about their culture that they live in, about, the environment, their government, the politics, the law, the this, the that, the taxes they have to pay. It goes on and on and on about this nasty world that we're in, and the greed and the dysfunction of all the people. So the average person is sitting there in this mild depression, which he calls life. And to find somebody else that's not doing it right makes us feel better. And in our mind, in our self-centered mind, we see almost everybody is not doing it right. And if they would just do it the way we know is the best way to do it, everything would be so much better. They just had the right attitudes and knew the things that we knew and believed the things that we believed. If they just understood that, then life would be so much better. You see, we take this attitude for several reasons. One, because we're self-centered, so we look at and judge the world according to how we know that it should be. And two, it's the fact that we, as a self-centered person, we are insecure. When you're self-centered, you're also insecure. And when you're insecure, then you feel better if you see everybody else is worse than you are. Not everybody else, but a lot of people, that most people are just not doing it right. They're not living their life right. They're not making good choices. They don't have the right attitudes. They don't understand the right things. They're misled. They're just a problem. So you at the center of this very dysfunctional universe, actually. And that's where all the judgment comes from. We judge everything. Now,
Bible says, right? The Bible gives us that discretion to be able to do that.
To judge, yes. Well, there's times when we do have to judge. Judging isn't a bad thing in itself. That's not, it's not that nobody should judge anything. You do have to make judgments. You do have to make assumptions. You do have to take guesses, particularly in this world where we are overwhelmed with so much information, so much stuff going on. Our environments and our worlds are incredibly busy and full of things, say, compared to even 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, they were really busy compared to 20 years before that. If you go back a couple of hundred years, you realize that most people didn't have a lot going on in their day. They got up and did the same things. They'd go, milk the cows, tend to the chickens, do the laundry, cook the food, go to work, chop wood. They did whatever they did. That was basically things that had to be done for them to survive and live as well as they could. And that was it. And the next day was just like the last day. There wasn't a lot of new stuff to deal with. There wasn't a lot of, new choices that you had to make. Now today, living in the 21st century, you'll get 10 new choices, every day. And if you live on a fast, track, every hour, you'll get lots and lots of choices that you have of what you could do and should do and might do and shouldn't do. And choices just fall out. Do you get this information or that information? Information overload. Choose. What am I going to pay attention to? What am I going to, spend my time doing? You could do this. There's lots of things you could do. Our options are plentiful now. So we have to judge. We have to say, well, should I go to the playhouse tonight and watch such and such a play, or should I just stay home and pet my dogs and be with my children? Should I read a book? Should I, watch a movie? Goodness, lots of things I could do just tonight, And so we make judgments, but those judgments are fine. We need to make them, but we need to get out of that self-centered viewpoint that says we're right and anybody who differs with us is wrong. That's the problem. And that's the self-centeredness, and that's being the master of your own little universe, living at the center of your own world. So it's just a symptom of the lack of consciousness quality that we have. It's like that. Okay, so that's part of the problem. We judge everything, and we like to find the negative in things. We look at the negative, where our attention is drawn to the negative. And there's several reasons for that. For one, as far as this thing like with the Dalai Lama, it makes us feel superior. Oh, look at that guy. He's such a big wheel. Everybody loves him. He's so perfect. And look, he asked some child to suck his tongue. Oh, how awful. And those kinds of things get us, excited, get us kind of wound up.
True.
You see? Whereas, what happened the other day? I was playing with my little nephew, And my brother George came in and he looked at the little guy and he said, "Hey, little guy, suck my tongue." And would that have been a big deal? We'd say, "No, that was just, George, just go away. You're just not funny today." And it wouldn't have been a big deal. It just would have been kind of something inappropriate that was said by somebody trying to be funny or trying to entertain a child or make the child laugh or something like that. And it wouldn't have been a big deal, you see, but it was a big deal because this very high, lofty, person who's wonderful, we like to bring those kind of people down. We bring them down to be more like us because those are the people, when we look at them, we can't see them as not as good as us. We see them as better than us. We are not that loving. We're not that caring. We don't have that level of quality. And that makes us uncomfortable because now we squirm a little in our little chair at the center of the universe because we see something that makes us feel not so good. And this guy stumbles and falls and does something like that. "Oh yeah, I knew he wasn't that great. I'm not that far away from him. And I never would have said that. And he said that. So I'm about as spiritual as he is, you see." So we love to put down people who are held up on pedestals by large numbers of people. If you are a person that is known to be very high quality or a wonderful person or whatever, then there isn't anything that the self-centered person would like better than to be able to trash such a person, because that person actually makes him feel not so perfect. That's a good example of somebody that is much more grown up than they are. So that's why it spreads so quickly, because so many people would love to pull down anyone that's up on a pedestal, anyone that is considered to be wonderful and great. That's really news. And we make a really big deal of it, where if it's just been cousin George or whoever, brother George, everybody would have rolled their eyes and said, "That's George." He does annoying stuff like that. He's a little off color and says goofy things, and it just wouldn't have been a big deal in anybody's life. They just would have seen as a mildly inappropriate thing, particularly if the kid just giggled, which would be mostly what a kid would do to something like that. Even if you did say that and not blow in my face or "I love you" or something, but even if you did say something like that, children would mostly just go, "Ew, gross," and then giggle, and everybody would think it was funny. So that is the second part of it. And the third part of it is that we, particularly in the West, and I think particularly among women, have this thing about the sacred child. Children are almost sacred in our culture now. And it wasn't always like that. Go back 100, 150 years, and kids not only weren't sacred, but they just kind of got along the best they could, with very little attention, because mom and dad were busy just trying to survive. And the kids didn't have a lot of attention. They just found ways to help, ways to work, and they otherwise stayed out of the way. But today it's almost the sacred child. And I say mostly women because women have an instinct to care for and protect children. So it's just kind of an instinctual thing. If you take a bunch of people and there's a child that's being hurt or being abused or something, the women have almost a visceral, reaction to that, because that's part of their fundamental instinct, is to take care of and protect children. Now, for men, they also have an instinct to protect women and protect children, but women first. It's so men wouldn't have that same kind of what I would call overreaction to it as the females have. And in our culture right now, the overreaction is more over than it would have been otherwise. And I remember, it was probably in the 1980s, maybe middle 1980s, the child abuse thing almost became hysteria in our culture. You could just randomly point at somebody and go, child abuser, and they would be stoned on the spot. It was almost a hysterics back in the 80s. And it's calmed down some, but it's not as bad as it was. That was, I'm not sure what triggered it, but it's kind of run as a sub-hysteric thing in our culture since then. But sometimes in the 80s, remember there was a whole spate of that, and some 12-year-old girl would come out and say, oh yeah, my Uncle Fred, he touched me. And suddenly, Uncle Fred's in deep trouble, maybe even in jail. And later the girl said, well, I just made that up because everybody else, I wanted the attention and everybody else was saying things like that. And anyway, it was just a time where the child abuse thing had super sensitivity to it. And a lot of people,
the witch's hunt.
Yeah, like the witch's hunt. Yeah, you can get a little crazy about it, if you get wrapped up around that. And I kind of remember, neighbors were calling the I don't know what it is, the authorities because somebody had a bruise on their face. Well, kids have bruises all over them a lot of the time because, particularly little boys, because they play rough and tumble and they're a little clumsy and anyway. So there was just a lot of that kind of thing. To where even
kind of with animals, but it's like the innocent. What if they're the innocent? But so of course we're not saying that all of those children lied.
Oh no.
No, we're just saying that it was so hysterical that it built and built and built. The media thing is like everything kind of built, and a lot of people.
I can remember at that particular time in those 80s. I remember a thing that was kind of amusing. My daughter has an allergy to strawberries.
Oh.
And we didn't know that until she ate a whole bunch of strawberries. We got strawberries and she ate more than her share, probably ate, like 10 or 20 strawberries. And she broke out in hives all over her face, her arms, her legs. And we had no idea what it was. And at the beginning, we didn't know that it was the strawberries either. So we bundle her off and take her to a doctor to say, what's wrong with this child? She suddenly, looks like she's been beaten with a rubber hose, and whatever. She just looked horrible. Welts, not only were there red splotches, but they stood out, as welts. And immediately it's like, oh, did you beat this child? And it's like, no, we don't know what happened to her. Honest, it was that sort of things. And you actually had to worry about those kinds of things because at that time the culture was so hypersensitive. You see, so yeah, I can remember that. It's like, hey, sweetie, you're going to have to stay in and not go outside because we don't want to have to explain this thing about strawberries to the neighbors and everybody else.
Oh dear. Yeah.
So anyhow, yeah, that was a time. So that is another thing. That's still kind of not as hysterical as it was today, as it was in the 80s, but it's still a thing that triggers a lot of people. And that trigger just kind of sets them off to kind of go into accusatory space, hyperspace, to get upset, to get angry. And it's like any of the other emotional triggers that we have. It just creates this huge irrational response. And that response spreads. And it starts to create its own, little consciousness bubble. Its own little collective consciousness outrage spreads, more and more people feel outraged. And so that's the third thing that's going on, is that there's a hypersensitivity to that. And yes, doing anything that's negative or hurtful or even not helpful to a child is an awful thing. We need to protect children. That's good that our culture wants to protect children, but we can get a little crazy with that too, to where, we can push it a little too far. So that's all.
Pretty pilot parenting right now. A lot of them can't do anything these days, which is unfortunate. I see all these kids wearing masks and I'm thinking, why are we still doing this? We're outside, and I get it, but it's lowering all of their immune system because they're always wearing a mask. It's just we kind of overdo it. We're going overboard on a lot of things, which.
And we haven't mentioned the fear word yet. And, we need to talk about fear and love, every session that we have. So that's basically the fear thing. We're afraid. And that's why
it's triggering something in our childhood that might have happened where we might have been embarrassed or had, an example of, it could be triggering us from so many different places, but I'm just wondering if maybe the most angry people are because something happened to them or they got caught up. But
that's possible.
So many things.
I don't think that's as likely, but that's possible. But I think so that was three basic problems. One, people are fearful, therefore they're self-centered, therefore they're insecure. When they're insecure, they love to see the negative in everything else because that makes them feel superior. Two, they kind of are in a sense of being, like everything is awful. They trigger on the negative. Everything's awful in our society and in our culture and in our politics and in our whatever, and we see the negative in everything, so we tend to jump on that negative boat. People love to take down people who are raised up high. We like to find things wrong with people like that because that makes us feel better about ourselves. And we have this cultural thing, particularly among the women, that have a very gut level reaction to something that was done to a child. Now, the Dalai Lama didn't stick his tongue in the child's mouth or, slap the child or do anything like that. Just said something that was at least interpreted to be a little on the edge. Not that funny, but
that's funny. No, not the suck tongue. Blow in the face, that could have been cute. Blow in the face. That blow in the face is actually a blessing. Anyway, but yes.
So and it may not, like you say, that may not even have been an intent at all. It's just could be just a translation error. And again, people wanting to see something that's wrong are apt to jump to conclusions. Look what I just saw. Big news. Dalai Lama wants child to suck his tongue. And of course that's just not it. But that gets attention, and that sells newspapers, and that brings in money, and that gets people to click on your link, and all of that is about money and power and so on. So people do it, whether it's true or not. So all in all, it's just an event that happened that was overblown, overworked, but it made money for people, so they're going to work it get as much out of it as possible. It sped through the information sphere because of that, because it was a moneymaker. It was an attention grabber. Anything that's an attention grabber is also a moneymaker. Every time you grab somebody's attention and they click something, somebody gets some money, So it's a moneymaker. So that was kind of what it's about. But yes, we have this problem with judging people. Now, let's look at the other side of it, the love side. If you're not self-centered, and if you see people as just like you, struggling to get along, struggling to learn their lessons, struggling to have a higher quality of consciousness, struggling to do the right thing, and they're doing the best they can with what they have. And what they have is a lot of fear. They have a lot of beliefs. They have, insecurities. They have all that. That's what they have. That's what they have developed in this life. And now with all that stuff, they're trying to deal with things. And of course they get angry and they fly off the handle and they exaggerate and they do all kinds of things because of that. But now when you look at them, rather than being angry, look at all those stupid people doing stupid things, you say, well, look at all those people just struggling, doing their best to get along with what they've got, what they have to work with. And they're unhappy for the most of the part. They don't really like themselves that much. Also, they feel insecure, inadequate, and they're trying to avoid that feeling. And they have all kinds of strategies for avoiding that feeling. And one is judging other people and judging them harshly. It's one of their strategies for making themselves feel better. So when you look at people like that, instead of being angry with them, you have compassion for them. And instead of judging them and saying, look, they're not doing that right, and they shouldn't have said that, and they shouldn't have that attitude, that's a bad attitude. Instead of judging them, you have this compassion that says, well, they're doing the best they can. And they just are who they are. Now, some people, you just don't want to be around. People who are very self-centered, you don't really want to be around. People who are unpleasant, nasty, violent, people who are bigoted, you don't want to be around. People who are always saying negative things, people who are always complaining, people who are always, blaming, everyone but themselves for all their problems. You don't really want to be around those people because they're downers. These are negative people and they're downers. But to judge them and say, oh, what an awful person, that's not helpful. Right. That doesn't help you. That doesn't help them. You should look at people like that and go, wow, I wish, what could I do to help? Well, the one thing I can do to help is try really hard not to push any of their buttons. They got buttons all over them, all kinds of things set them off. And I just will try not to push any of those buttons. The other thing that will help, if I could just say something nice to them, a kind word, a smile, just any little thing, any little, even small thing. Oh, that's a nice shirt you're wearing today, whatever. That would help. That would add just a little bit of positivity in their life and realize they just are who they are. They're not yours to fix. They're not your responsibility to take care of and fix who they are. They have to do that themselves. You can't do it, even if you wanted to. So you just accept them. That's the way they are. And, besides having all those buttons, they also have some really good things about them, too. In ways, they're nice people. They're trying real hard to do what they think is right. They care about others. They have love. They have caring. They have consideration with some people. And they're not very considerate, maybe, to other people. But you can look at the good sides of them and say, well, I'm going to interact with that good side. I'm not going to push any buttons. And if their favorite thing is baseball, I'll ask them about, who won the last game. Or I don't know anything about baseball, but at least I'll ask them about it anyway, because they don't want to talk about it. And that's okay. So I'll do that. So I'll interact with them in a way that is positive. And by doing that, it actually helps them, lift them up out of that pre-depression space that they stay in all the time. So now you're being helpful to them, and you're being helpful to yourself because you're making good choices rather than saying, oh, look at that awful person. They're so negative. All they do is complain. Get lost. I really don't want to talk with you. And act maybe rude to them or obviously make it obvious that you really don't want to talk to them, which just, of course, makes them feel worse. So instead, you go and say hello and ask them how they're doing and how their children are and, how about the baseball world and whatever it is you think will be positive for them. And the interaction doesn't have to be long. You can just leave a little spot of positivity in their life, and that will help them, and it helps you. Good choices you're making. You're being helpful to people. You're not judging them. You're letting them be who they are, interacting with them in ways that are positive, avoiding all those ways that are negative, realizing that it's not your job to change them. It's like, oh, these are defective people and I need to help fix that. That is just not the right attitude. But that's an attitude that most of us take, and the people around us, we want to fix them, make them the way we think, or the way we know that they really should be. If they were just this other way, they'd be a lot happier. Well, we would be happier. They may or may not be. But anyway, that's kind of the flip side, what you should be doing, rather than the judging all the time. Judging is a self-centered thing, seeing the world as a reflection of yourself. And that's not how it works. You need to be caring and let people be defective. That's where they are, and then you'll stop even seeing it as defective. They're not defective. They're just who they are. I mean, we don't look at children and say they're defective adults. We don't see children that way. Oh, they're just a bunch of defective adults. They need to change. We see children as children. That's just who they are. Okay, children are self-centered because that's the way they come. And they grow out of that, hopefully, as they get older. Some do, a lot don't, but that's how maturity is measured, is by how much you get rid of that self-centeredness that you have when you're a child. So we look at self-centered children who do a lot of foolish things, make a lot of terrible mistakes, have bad choices, because they're just learning. And we let them be. All right, Georgie just went over and grabbed that toy out of Susie's hands because he wanted it and Susie had it. Well, we don't go over and slap Georgie. We go over and talk to them and say, now, Georgie, that wasn't a nice thing to do, to grab that toy. Susie was playing with that toy. And you take the toy away from Georgie and you give it back to Susie and say, now, when Susie's done with it, you can have it. And right now, instead of that, why don't you play with this? And get something we know that Georgie likes to distract his attention. And we deal with it in ways that are helpful, ways that are positive, and that helps those children learn. Well, we're no different as adults. When we interact with other adults, we need to be positive. We need to not go over and slap, you did it wrong, you're awful. Somehow jerk them around to be the way we want them, or order them. If you just went over to Georgie and said, that's wrong, don't ever do that again. Well, yeah, that would work, but it won't work nearly as good as the positive approach. Okay, that's the negative approach. The next time, Georgie will just make sure you're not looking and he doesn't get caught because you didn't teach him anything other than he needs to avoid you and your criticism and your judgments. That's all you're teaching Georgie, is how to be how to get away with it. Not that it's wrong. When you're negative, you don't really teach. You just, you teach people how to deal with you, but not how to grow up. So that's kind of, the Dalai Lama, unfortunately, whether he intended or not, he got a lot of bad press and he kind of stuck his foot in it unintentionally. Didn't mean to, didn't seem to, didn't think so, but that happens. And that's one of the things that goes with being well known. When you're famous, particularly if you're famous for something very positive rather than famous for being ugly or famous because you're so mean, if you're famous for being positive, then there's millions of people just waiting for you to make a mistake. And when you do, it gets shouted out, to everyone everywhere. So it's almost to the point that you have to be really careful about what you say and when you say it and who's looking and, are the cameras running and are the reporters there, which means you can't act natural. You can't just be yourself. You always have to be aware of the PR value of everything you do. And you just can't go up to a kid and have fun with them and play with them and say something silly to them or rub noses with them or whatever, because you just feel like it and they feel like it and everybody has a good time and giggles. You just can't be who you are because you create problems. And that's unfortunate that we do that to the people we look up to, the people who are our teachers, the people who show us the possibilities of what you can become. And if you want to be that good role model, then it's really hard to also be authentic and be yourself, because every thing that you do, every sneeze that you have, is monitored and looked at and judged. So it's unfortunate, but we're like that. We do that to the people that we admire the most. We put them in that kind of a unpleasant space where they have to always be aware. Anybody who's kind of famous gets in that, has that same problem. The royals in Britain, have the photographers that run around and chase them in all their private moments and try to get pictures and this and that, and they can't in public be real. Right. They have to always, be thinking about image and what's whatever. Otherwise, they have a big mess to deal with, and they're not as effective then as people for good images, good, what am I saying, a good someone to look up to. And that's part of what they give to the world as an example of how to be. Right. They have become love in a large part, and they just are an example. Other people can look up and say, oh, that's what it's like when you get rid of all that fear. You get to be like that, somebody who's happy and smiles and is wise and, that sort of thing. So that makes them good role models. But this other stuff then tarnishes that, and now they're not as effective as a good role model, which is a shame, because the Dalai Lama is one of the world's most outstanding role models as far as how to be a kind and gentle person, a caring person. We tend to shoot ourselves in the foot a lot. We tear down the few things that are helping us grow up. So in a way, it's just kind of sad, that happens. But it happens. It'll happen again, and it happens. It's just the way we are, and it's we have to just accept that and say, well, we'll do better eventually. As we grow up, it is the way we are, but we can't be any other way. It's the way we are, and that's a fault. It's the way we are, and that's life. It just is the way it is. And we need to deal with it and live with it positively. So it's kind of a sad thing. Love is often sad as we see people hurting themselves and hurting each other for no particular reason other than it serves their insecurity. So it's sad to see that happen, but it is the way it is, and we'll go on, and the Dalai Lama will be more careful next time that he will.
I don't know about that. I've been to his trainings and stuff as Kalachakra. I mean, he's just this very playful person. I mean, he scratches under his arm when they're bare, and I don't think he cares about what people think. I mean, he did, obviously, because he apologized, but he's just so, innocent. Like, he's just got like this playful.
He just is. You see, he's very authentic, and he just is, and he will continue to be that way, but he'll have to guard it a little bit because now his image is tarnished, and he's not as effective as helping people grow up as a role model as he was before. Because, the Dalai Lama, he does inappropriate things with children, or says inappropriate things with children, So it's just too bad. And he'll be a little more aware of that next time. He's a smart guy. He knows, but he'll still be himself. He'll just be a little more careful. You can't always be yourself in all circumstances. When there are people around who will take negative things away, then it's not good for them to take negative things away. So you have to be careful not to create that. Image is important. It'd be nice if we could just say, to hell with our image. We just go out and live our life and everybody will just have to deal with me the way I am. That's okay up to a certain point. But image is important in that you don't want to say or do things that create negative responses in people, because you're not helping them. You need to create positive responses in people. That's what pulls us all up. And when you create a negative response in people, that's just not what you want to do. Now, you can't help it. People are people. Some people will take a negative response to anything you do. But you want to minimize that negative response. That's important too. Like when I talk to people and I try to answer questions, I have to be mindful of what the 100,000 people that will read that or watch that video over the next 10 years, that I don't say things that could hurt those people, that could create negative, that could lead them in the wrong direction, that could somehow be a negative influence or create or trigger a negative thing. Now it's 100,000 people. In 100,000 people, you're going to get all kinds of people in that from all different belief systems and all different attitudes. So trying to minimize that negativity is something you have to be aware of when you state things. Well, I don't always say things that in a group like that where it's going to be seen by lots and lots of people, I don't say things in the same way I would if there were 4 or 5 people just here physically, and I was talking just a small group and it wasn't being filmed. It wasn't going to go out. Now I can loosen up a bit and say things that are maybe a little more astonishing or whatever, because it's not going to create negativity somewhere. It's in a small group, and that negativity won't necessarily spread. So I tend to be a whole lot more, less cautious and more open, and say more details in a small group than I will in a big group with the cameras running, just because I don't want a negative response going out if I can help it. I want it always to be positive. So we do have to think about that side. You can't just say, well, I don't really care what anybody thinks. That's okay when you're not influencing very many people. When you're not the Dalai Lama and it's just you and your friends and your family, well, you just don't care what anybody thinks, and that's fine. It doesn't matter. But when you become a personality that has connection to, and him, to hundreds of millions of people, then it does matter what you say and how you say it. And you need to be mindful of that. And you just can't just be yourself. As much as you would enjoy just being yourself, you have to care about the overall effect that you have in the world. It's, when you get to that level like he is, then he has to care, because he does have an overall effect in the world. And there's not many people who do, but he's one of the few who does have that kind of reach that millions of people know of him and his thoughts and his attitudes. And mostly they're all enriched by it. But so, that's kind of a bummer for him, but it's life. You do have to be careful about what you say. Even
when we're careful, people will judge us. We've read the comments.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But that's the way people are.
That goes back to number one.
Yeah, it takes us back to the beginning. That's it. People are insecure. People have fear. People have ego. People have beliefs. And they're going to live their life and express all that fear and ego and belief. They're going to express it all the time because that's who they are. And we just need to be as positive as we can to those people and try not to trigger them.
Well, we really do get the whole hour in quickly, don't we?
We do.
Feel like we just started.
Yeah.
Well, very interesting show. I'm glad we discussed it, because I think it's important for people to just sort of, take a moment. I mean, yes, we're not saying all the atrocious things that have been done, that they are good. We're just saying, sometimes we need to look at and come from a place of love and acceptance instead of judgment and pain.
Yeah. Well, we never say that this is the way you should think or react in all situations. It's not like that. Every situation is unique and different. And if somebody really is harming and being rude to or not nice to or hurting children, then you need to intervene. You need to do something about that. That's wrong. And it's particularly wrong with children, because the trauma you cause those children then becomes trauma, when they're in teenagers, and trauma when they're adults, and trauma when they're trying to have a relationship or trying to raise their own children. And, that kind of stuff goes on, and it continues to feed negativity into our environment for all the rest of their lives. So we have to be particularly careful with children. Yes, they're different than adults, need more protection than adults. You need to be more careful about what you say and how you say it and what you do, because they're very malleable, very changeable, and you can affect them in ways that you just would never imagine. You can say something to a child and you think it's just fine, and it may affect them the rest of their life because of the way they interpret it. So it's, as children, we do have to be particularly careful and particularly protective over our children. I agree with that. But there are excesses that we can do that aren't positive. Anything, you can take anything almost to an excess to where it stops being positive and starts being negative and starts being hurtful and doing damage rather than doing good. So you just have to be aware of, what is appropriate, at what, with any given circumstance. Everything's unique. You can't make a rule and say, this is the rule and always follow this rule, because somebody will always come up with something where that rule doesn't actually fit.
And they'll look, and they'll look, and they'll look. It's like, oh, I'm going to find something where this doesn't fit.
Yeah, absolutely. So every situation's different. So just be aware whether or not your motives are coming from fear, or whether your motives are coming from caring and love. And if they're coming from fear and you're feeling negative and want to, talk about negative things, then you probably ought to just be quiet and not talk at all. And take a look at what you're doing and why you're doing it.
All right.
So yes, we're all in favor of treating children with care, but we're not in favor of abusing the Dalai Lama, who was just trying to be himself and make a little child happy. Yeah.
All right. Well, you've been listening to News for the Heart. We've been getting the heart of what matters with Tom Campbell. Judgment, love, always. All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll be back next month for sure. And might take a little break after that. But yes. All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Laurie.